Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Miller. I am a Senior Associate Counsel at UPMC Health Plan, and I am one of the proud co-chairs of the Bridges Society. And we're very excited to welcome you all to a program today for both our Bridges members and for our members who are considering joining through the Step Up program. I have the honor today to introduce Morgan O'Brien. Morgan is a native Pittsburgher, raised by a blue-collar Irish Catholic family to value all people and all forms of work. His work ethic and people-centric approach helped him to rise to CEO at Duquesne Light Company. He later became the CEO at People's Gas. He raised his family here and now has the privilege of watching that family grow in this region. In his CEO roles, he was the face and voice of hardworking employees who dedicated each day to serving local families and businesses. He successfully grew those companies in terms of both employment and investor value, and he partnered to position both Peoples and Duquesne Light as the true community partners and champions that they are today. Both continue to invest and partner with many organizations that drive economic development and improve the quality of life in our region. Morgan's a proud alum of Robert Morris University. He's very active in civic organizations throughout the region, including serving as the incoming chair of the Board of Trustees of RMU. He serves on numerous boards, some of which include Matthews International, Watt Fuel Cell, Environ Power, Dollar Energy, Neighborhood 91, AHN Cancer Institute. He's the co-chair of Pittsburgh Works Together. He's on the board of United Way of Southwestern PA, the African American Chamber, and the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust. He's also the current chair of the United Way campaign and somehow still had time to meet with us and chat today. So I am very honored to welcome Morgan O'Brien to our program.
Yeah, and thank you, Laura. I really appreciate that. I actually appreciate all the work that everyone here has done. I think being the chair of the campaign, you get to see how every step we take and every piece of progress that folks here contribute to, it makes a world of difference. And so was excited when we started the campaign because of the challenges and the opportunities here. And I'm really excited about, I think the success of this campaign through a lot of, I'll call it an army of people that have really made a difference. I'm going to give you a little bit of my more color on my background, particularly around, some of the leadership challenges and really, I'll call it evolution that's happened within me. And then obviously we'll throw it out, for some questions here. As you heard, I was CEO of two, what I consider to be really good companies here in this region, Duquesne Light Company and then People's Gas. When I started my career, I can honestly and openly say to you, I never had as a goal of mine to become CEO of a company. It honestly sort of just happened. And along the way, I think obviously like all of us, you evolve, you learn, and you hopefully become better with every step that you take. And I'll start with, what I consider to be a visualization of what I think leadership is today versus where I started. I think when I started, if you'd asked me to describe what a leader is, I would describe to you somebody who has a powerful vision, something that's exciting to aspire to become, and then sort of out in front of everyone, taking the lead on moving forward to that goal. And I would say that was my picture. If you ask me today, what a leader is, I would describe it differently. I would say still, creating and building a consensus around an exciting vision and aspiration of what you can become. But then I see it as the shepherd moving the flock along, heading in that direction and leaving, nobody behind. And so I'll give you a little bit of color of like how I think I evolved in my thinking around leadership. So I became CEO at Duquesne Light at the age of 41 here in Pittsburgh. As you heard, I'm the son of an Irish immigrant. It was the American dream, right? My dad came over here, blue collar worker. His dream was for us to go to college. We all went locally to college. And I joke with my kids that I went to Robert Morris because I had to find a job when I graduated. It wasn't trying to find myself. I wasn't trying to make the world a better place. It was purely with the goal of having a job that I could support myself and eventually a family. And so when I took over at Duquesne Light, I described my journey to get to become CEO as one that I feel like I was very aggressive, not as a person, but as far as putting up opportunities and ideas that I think challenged and disrupted how the company was before. And it was funny, and I would tell like people close to me that they would say, wow, you're proposing that to a senior team, or you're proposing that to somebody. And I always said I never had any fear of getting fired if it was the idea was too crazy, because I said I had a lot of confidence I could always find another job. It's just like who I was. And so I'll never forget when I finally became chief executive officer at Duquesne Light. I was literally driving home from the board meeting, and I said, I think I finally reached that point. If I lost my job, I couldn't replace it. And so my confidence in not necessarily feeling at risk turned to fear of failure. And I remember studying a lot of my predecessor. And I always tell people, typically CEOs only change when there's a sort of a natural progression, retirement of somebody that's planned in advance, or a business strategy that went wrong, that the board has to react to. And in my instance at Duquesne Light, it was the latter. So I was coming in having to clean up a business and sort of put it back on right shipping it and all of that. But I remember thinking, the person who preceded me in that role had a better education than I had, went to an Ivy League school, was much smarter than me, was a really deep thinking guy with a lot of understanding of our industry. And I remember identifying what I thought was caused his failure. And that was surrounding himself with people who told him things that weren't true. It was what he wanted to hear versus what was really going on. And so when I stepped into that role, my biggest fear was having people around me, even people who I knew, but because of my role now and their role, that they would tell me what I wanted to hear. And I spent literally the first 6 months out in the field talking to every employee that I could, listening. And then I know people ask all the time, like, what's some of your best advice to people? And I remember early on in my career, somebody told me that when you're talking, you obviously, which I'm doing here, are just sharing with people what you already know, and your perspective on things. When you're listening, you're learning and hearing other people's perspectives that make you and your perspectives either change or reinforces. And so listening is probably one of the key skill sets, I think, of any leader. And so I literally went around, and I remember asking people this simple question of, if you were in my role, what is it that you know that I should know in order for us not to fail? And I just remember, and people look at you, you're the CEO, you're this young guy, people think, you're not maybe approachable. But I just remember in one of my employee meetings, somebody came over to me and said, are you serious? Like you believe, you want to hear what I know? And I said, absolutely. I'm afraid of failing. And my failure is going to be not because I have bad intentions, it's because I have bad information. And the guy just said to me, look around this room. He's like, this is, a section of our company, and you're the youngest guy in the room at the time. And he said, we don't have young people coming in, and we don't have, sort of the food chain working its way through the organization. And if I were you, I would worry about that. And so I started writing it down, and then another person came over, and eventually I had my laundry list that when I sat down with our senior team, I went through and said, here are the things we need to be working on. And at one point, somebody said to me, like, where did you get this list? And, how did you have these perspectives? And I said, I went out and met with all your employees who report to you and gathered. And it was obviously a very, I'll say a well thought through list, because it wasn't mine. It came from, the people in the organization. And so, fast forward, I moved over to People's Gas, and the opportunity there was that it was a division of a big company in Virginia, and and a group of investors were buying it, and they were looking for somebody to bring the headquarters and really create a standalone company rather than an operating division of what it had been. And so my job was literally come here and create a whole organization. And I just remember thinking, when I took over at Duquesne Light, you inherit a lot of people in roles, and so you get to pick, sort of move people around and do some shuffling. But this was a unique opportunity to really create from a clean sheet of paper. All of my direct reports, none of them existed within the company. I had to go outside and hire. And I decided, like, this is such a once in a lifetime opportunity that I would really focus around leadership and how, people look at what a leader does and how a culture operates and how to be the most effective. And the one thing I learned in my early days at Duquesne Light, I said, as I described to you, I would go around and after listening to people and tell people, here's what we can be. And then I would go out and I would start doing things that would take us in that direction. And I just remember the movie of, it was Animal House, where John Belushi's like cheering people on and saying he goes outside running and he's the only one running, no one's with him. And a lot of times I felt that way. Like, I look behind me and there's nobody there. And so at Peoples, it was building that team that not just shook their head and listened to you, but actually believed in what you were trying to do. So it was not just a good HR person, a good CFO, a good chief information officer, but getting I'll call it the right culture within that group, so that when they formed their organizations, we'd have it. And, we spent a lot of time, I'll say, talking about culture and really developing an approach. And I would describe the culture that we created, hopefully they would describe it this way, was that in order for us to be successful, we had to have as many people, if not everyone on our team, embracing our vision. When I left there, we had almost 1,700 employees, all within 3 states here. And getting everyone going in the same direction, believing in the same things and trying to aspire to become the same thing, to me was really important. And I knew how powerful that was versus the other approach of sort of trying to lead people by example and inspiring people to follow you. And so here we spent, I'd say, a lot of time with groups of people. We built a vision of what we were going to be. And I think if you've follow like modern management styles, there's a guy out there who I think is a really inspiring, challenging thinker, Simon Sinek. And we actually brought him in, and the search of your why, like, why does your company exist? Why do you exist, right? Why do you do what you do? And we spent a lot of time looking at everybody's why. And I had done some research as to why People's Gas even existed. And the story was, which really, I think, fed into what I was hoping, is that it was created 130 years ago because of the steel mills in Pittsburgh that were burning coal, and that they were polluting the air, and it was gray skies and on sunny days, and all the stories we used to hear about Pittsburgh. And a group of folks started drilling for oil out near Monroeville and came upon what turned out to be natural gas. And it was the first natural gas well in the United States. It was right in Murrysville. And they weren't sure what natural gas was because they were trying to get oil. And they decided to burn it. And they could see it was blue and it burned clean. And they had this idea that if they put that gas in pipes and took it to the steel mills, they could burn it much cleaner than the coal. And so a company was formed, which was People's Gas, to take that gas from Murrysville and take it to one of the steel mills. And there's a story in the New York Times that I had in my office, and it said that, like, natural gas would forever change Pittsburgh. And so I said it, we were formed to make people's lives better here in this region, to make the air better and to make the quality of life better. And that became our mission of making lives better here. And I remember, like, so we all that was a consensus. It wasn't Morgan O'Brien. And I remember, like, I go out in the field and people would say, I don't know what that means for me. Like, And I'd say to them, like, why do you come to work? What do you like about what you do? And always, the answer was almost 100%. It was helping somebody. If they were the person who went out at night when you had a gas leak, checking on your furnace, like helping you solve that problem. If it was a billing question and they were able to help you, like for them, it was the best day was always when they were helping people. And so my job became, and my management team's job was to empower people, to sort of allow them to help people and to do it in their ways that they believe were correct. And, and I would always say, we build these walls on what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. But if we empower people to do it the way they see it, it'll become very, very powerful. And I'll give you a real quick example is that I was talking to a group of service guys who are the people that come in your house when you have a gas leak at night. And they said to me, we go in there and if the furnace is leaking, we put a red tag on it and we shut the gas off because it's unsafe, and tell the person they need to call a plumber who comes in and fixes the furnace. And then we come back and inspect it. But the reality is when we're doing that, it's usually a very cold day or a cold night. And there's not a plumber sitting outside waiting to fix this. So they have to go sometime and then they have to find a plumber who's available and all that. And I was listening to these guys and I said, okay. And they said, well, we're all plumbers. And I said, okay. And they said, most of the time, almost always, we could fix it. And I said, so why don't we fix it? And they said, well, we were told it's not our asset. The furnace belongs to the customer and yada, yada. And long story short, I said, where you can fix it and you're comfortable doing it and the customer gets comfortable, you'll do it. Let's just fix it. And so, I left Peoples when we sold the company to Aqua America, and it was literally a month before I was leaving. And there was a new employee meeting, and I was the last speaker. And one of the lineman service guys was up talking to this group of people, and he literally said, "I'm going to tell you about like the best day in my job in the last." Almost 30 years he was with the company. And he said he went into this house, it was late at night, the gas was leaking, he found a leak. It was a young couple, they had little kids, they were sleeping, it was like almost midnight. And he said to the guy, I think I can fix your furnace. And the guy said, please, whatever you can do. And so he said he took it apart, it was really complicated, he was worried he couldn't get it, and sure enough he fixed it. And he said he went home that night, got up the next morning, come back to work, and he was leaving. And his wife said, how was your night? And he said, I had the best night I've ever had in my 30 years. And she said, like, what happened? And he said, I helped this family and I feel really good about it. And it just made me feel good about like what I do. And, it's funny. And I sat there and said, I'm going home. I don't want to talk to these employees now because they know what it means to embrace our culture. It's taking what you believe to be a good thing and making it a good thing for the company. Obviously, having a company that, people see you as somebody who cares about the people you work for is really, really important. And I look back and say, we could have put a lot of processes in, a lot of, I'll call it checks and balances, but for people to own it themselves and feel empowered and safe to do things that they believe is the right thing to be doing. To me, that's the definition of leadership. It changed from when I would lead and tell people and show people what leadership or what we wanted them to be doing, as opposed to them owning it. And I know, having seen it, it's incredibly powerful when a group of people own, call it a vision or a mission, and put it to life in their own ways. And, over the years, you hear, people say we get paid money. That's why we come to work. We got to pay bills. The reality is we have lots of options to do it. And if you can create a place where people feel what they do is important and it's a value, to me, it's, it retains employees, it keeps employees. I look back on both experiences and take a lot of pride in knowing that it wasn't me that was necessarily the person coming up with the ideas and change in work plans, but it was me and my team who empowered the people and made them feel safe to be able to do that. So I'm gonna, I'll take a stop in a second here, and I know we've got potential questions here, but a lot of folks will ask me, so you became CEO of a company, and it was funny because my biggest fear, I said to you when I became CEO at Duquesne Light, is I couldn't find another job, and I actually found another CEO job here in Pittsburgh. So that killed that myth. So my fear of failing, I shouldn't have been so afraid. But the reality is, I think I've seen, particularly early in my stages as chief executive officer versus where I was, at the later days, that the key to being a good leader is getting people to believe together, right, as to what your mission and your vision of what you're trying to accomplish. And then to empower them and challenge them to solve the problems, think of new ways. And the power of that, which I'm sure is obvious to all of you, is that now you've got an army of people who own it, as opposed to, sort of the opposite, which is, to me, is not great leadership. So, all right. So with that, I'll throw it back to you, Laura.
Yeah. So we have a few questions, and I wanted to make sure that we gave everyone the opportunity to ask you questions. Some of them have come in ahead of time. I think our first question, and thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing that. It's amazing just sort of to be reminded, that we're all on a similar path, and that, threading in doing a good job for our community is really the most important part of all of that. So our first question is Chelsea Knapton. So Chelsea, you want to ask your question?
Hi, sure. Hi, Morgan, thanks for meeting with us today and sharing all your insights. Because my question would be, if you could provide, one piece of advice to the rising leaders in the region, what would that be?
I mean, the first piece of advice is that you don't need to be a CEO to be a leader. In fact, I know a lot of CEOs and people who have titles who aren't good leaders. And so I would actually challenge people in my organization that if you're leading 2 people or 3 people or whatever group it is, I mean, you have the opportunity potentially to be a great leader. And I think where I grew as a person is, one, I got comfortable with the idea that I didn't have answers to questions, and that listening and engaging with the people that worked for me was incredibly powerful. And it creates an incredible dynamic when you're dealing with challenges, to know where people feel like they are a part of the solution, and that there's somebody who's listening and willing to, do the things that, make the most sense. And so I think as a leader, I mean, you really have to put your ego at the door, I think, to be a really effective leader. And you also have to make people feel safe and empowered to sort of step up, right? Otherwise, they'll feel like it's a set, they won't feel comfortable being, I'll say, as bold as you'd like. But I think any of us, and all of you who are in this conversation right now, have the opportunity to be a leader, because it's not about title. It's literally, I think, about empowering yourself to allow the people that work for you to become the best versions of themselves. And it's like, who wouldn't want to work for somebody who comes to work saying, how can I make the people that work for me better and help them in their careers? And, and if you just spiral that through an organization, you can see how powerful that is. So I think you've got to be, takes a while sometimes for all of us. I know for me, it wasn't intuitive to sort of put my ego aside. I thought as a leader, I had to know every answer. But I actually know, even when I know the answers, sometimes people have better answers. Or at a minimum, even if they're reconfirming my answers, the result is that you've got I'll call it a connection and a team that really believes in what they're doing versus people who were told well, how to move forward. So.
Great, thank you.
Great. Our next question is from Alyssa Tukorchak.
Hi, Morgan. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today. I have a two-part question, same question, just through, I guess, two different lenses. What would your one or two key pieces of advice be for someone who might be leading their organization through transformational change? And then similarly, key pieces of advice for those who would be experiencing or impacted by that change?
Yeah, I think, first of all, whether it's transformational or almost any type of change, it takes like a fortitude and a commitment that it's a lot of work being a leader. And it's not, staying up late solving problems, but it's, making sure that everybody is engaged, that everybody has a chance to put their opinions and voices out, and that everybody feels a part of it. And the bigger the organization, the more work that is. I literally, because you saw, like a lot of people, I do a lot of other things other than just what I was doing during the day. And so I literally scheduled time on a regular basis to be out with employees in the field level and listening to them and reconciling what I was hearing to what I thought was happening always. And my challenge then to my senior team was always, if I'm going to do that, you need to be doing that, and all the way down that rippling effect. So I think it's one that you really have to be committed to it. You've got to be purposeful in your time, because it takes a lot of time. Never assume that things are continuing. Like, you always have to be checking and rechecking and asking questions and sort of reconfirming with what you think is going on versus what people are actually going on. So it's definitely a full commitment to it. And then another is just, spending a lot of time and just reconfirming and constantly, it has to be alive and just part of your routine. Otherwise you just get hung up on the issues of the day and the things that are really important. Sort of, if people see it's not important to you anymore, it's not important to them. So I would just say just a constant reconfirming of what those priorities are.
Sorry, we had a mute issue there. We have a question in the chat from Maris Dow. So Maris, I don't know if you can unmute yourself and ask, or I'm happy to ask it for you.
Sure, thanks, Laura. Can everybody hear me? I always have a little trouble with Zoom.
No, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So, you were able as a leader and CEO to bring in people that you could have and help with top-down culture. What do you suggest for people in sort of middle management, not CEO, not individual contributors, on how they can change culture within their own teams, particularly if they've inherited a lot of people?
Yeah, and it's funny. It takes bravery, right, to change culture, because it's it's putting yourself out there, and a lot of people talk about changing culture, but I think it takes being bold. So when I took over at Duquesne Light, my instance was, I inherited an organization that was failing, and I had to sort of create a new culture going forward. And when you come in at any leadership level, regardless of the title, that there are people who will embrace it and get it. Others who might fight it and see, well, you're just sort of the flavor of the week, and I'll show a little bit. I think as any leader, you've got to spend the energy and the time and put yourself out there as to what you're going to do, but then you have to stand behind it. in every leadership role I've had, I made changes to my group after a period of time when it was obvious that people, I'll say, weren't adopting the culture. And it's funny, it energized the group even more, because those who embrace it, that say, if your culture is you want me to be the best version of myself, and there's somebody who's sort of not buying into that or interfering with that, and they see you taking action of either removing that person or doing something, that empowers that, I'll say, that culture even more. And I mean, none of us like to do that, but I do think, because I think in the long run, if you have the right culture and one that people are drawn to, it's powerful, and it creates a lot of value, and regardless of what business you're in. And so I think it's worth the pain, but you have to be fully committed to it. It can't be, I'm going to put up with this over here. When some of the changes when I made at Duquesne Light, I was told by people, because I'm a financial person, not a technical person, there were people in the organizations technically we couldn't live without, and I could see they were such a clog in this, I'll call it the culture I was trying to create. But when I ended up making changes, we had people stand up who no one had ever seen stand up and be so much more effective. One, because they embraced the culture we were creating, but also, they felt sort of stymied beneath the person that they called a strong personality. And so it was like a rippling effect of making really hard changes and taking a risk. But I think if you really truly believe in the culture, and again, it could be a department, it could be a whole company, it could be, I look at it, I think, in any phase of what you're doing, if to the extent you have, some input and some control over that, I think you just have to be willing to take those steps, which it's not pleasant, it's not fun, but I just think the group that is the buying in and that's helping you go forward, it will empower them immensely to see how committed everybody is to what you're trying to do, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you, Morgan. Thanks.
We had Bobby had put in the comments that she'd ask a question. Is it your experience that those who don't adopt the culture eventually see the contrast and move on their own?
I think it's both. I think there are people that will shock the heck out of you. Like I would go out in the field, and this is an incredible story, and I would always ask people to tell me like what has changed and how they're doing their jobs, and just sort of the value of allowing people to sort of help customers, assist them in whatever way they could, and all the business process we changed to make ourselves better in that area that came from the field. And I had a guy come up to me and tell me a story that he didn't want to tell the group, that every year he took a portion of his bonus that he got, and he was this is organized labor field person, and he would use that money to help a family who couldn't afford paying their bills. And he was a guy who was involved in collections, and he understood the people, and this was in a rural community. And he told me every year he would just pick a family and play Santa Claus. And it's just like, and if you saw this person, you might even describe him as a disgruntled employee. But he got it, and he got it in a way that, like, was just incredible. And so, I think one is, I think a lot of times, if people know you're serious and you start really committed to it, and this is the only way we're going to be, you'll have incredible surprises. And then others who stand in the way, I think either they self-leave, or, to be frank, I think sometimes you have to handle that, because it's the vision of what you're trying to accomplish, and you really can't let people like that stand in the way of it. So
we have another question from Nate Sylvester. So Nate, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Hi, Morgan. Nate Sylvester
Hey,
with
Nate.
Kennametal. got a question for you. With your background in the utility industry and now participating in boards in both for-profit and nonprofit, what do you think making a social impact and tying such initiatives to corporate goals impact the bottom line?
So I'll just tell you, like my company was owned by financial investors. These were, infrastructure, private equity investors who could run Excel spreadsheets like you've never seen. And literally, that's how they would judge the business. And my team and my management team never saw those models, never, sort of like, that's the number I got to hit. I mean, my CFO, myself, we did. But I honestly, like I said, I'm going to bet my career on this, that if I've got everybody, working in the same direction with ideas and thoughts and create, revenue opportunities, how to be more efficient, how to take inefficiencies out. And so we grew the company in the 10 years there with, I'll call it this culture, like 3x. Like we really grew the company quickly, both the number of employees and the cash flows that we had, and literally the investors sold it in a premium that was beyond any of their expectations. And to me, it was a confirmation that without sitting there staring at a bunch of numbers, but literally empowering people. A quick story, and I hate to tell too many stories. We had one of our issues is developers put in homes all around the area. And for them, it's really important that we have the utilities ready to go on when they're finished with the house so that the people can move in and they get their money. And utilities are really bad at that because we're monopolies and, you're going to pay us our bill. We'll get to it when we get to it. And I put a team together that worked with these folks, and they came back to me and said, a lot of these builders in this region use propane tanks to heat their construction sites. So we threw out an idea to them in trying to make this all better. What if we put gas heaters in, actually ran the gas line before the construction, so you could use that on the site to heat the home that's getting built in the fall and even in parts of winter. And the builder was like, that would be amazing. And then they said, the beauty of that is you've got the gas pipe already at the house. And then when it's done, you're ready to go. And they came back and they said, and we'll be selling a lot of gas in the wintertime to a group of people that we never sold before. And with all the construction going on. So you created an incredible relationship with builders that said, this is a great model, actually lowered their costs because the gas heating was cheaper than the propane. And for us, created a revenue stream that nobody had ever even thought of. And that was just like a tiny example of a group of people who empower them to do it. And we had a number of those issues, and it was, my CFO was keeping score every time and always comparing it to what models the investors had, and we always surpassed their expectations. And it was literally, putting people, focused on the things that you knew were important, but literally empowering them to come up with ideas with a vision that says we want to be valuable to the people we're serving, and how do we become as valuable as we can. That's sort of the definition here. So I am like a believer times 3 now, that having a good purpose, a mission that's important, that people feel good about, I think is critical in having a sustaining business strategy, no matter what your business is. Turning it and equating it to what impact you're having in businesses or in people's lives, or both, and the greater good of what you're doing. And to me, I feel like we wrote the Harvard Business Review case on saying if you do this, you'll create value. And I think there's a million examples. I see it around town of businesses like yours who have that are trying to make the world a better place in lots of different ways. And still creating significant value for their investors.
Okay. The next question that we have is from Lakshmi Devar. Lakshmi?
Thanks, Laura. Hi, Morgan. It's been lovely listening to you talk today. And I just had a general question, listening to you speak and reading about your efforts in Pittsburgh, your whole life, really, like for someone that's new to Pittsburgh, I'm relatively new, how has your impression of the philanthropic community here, how has it shaped and evolved over the years? I'm very amazed at how deep rooted, the community efforts are here in this city. And what advice would you offer to someone new to how best to get involved and really embrace the true spirit of philanthropy in a way that can be brought back to, to help assist in developing a great corporate culture?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with, so I'll never forget when I first became CEO at Duquesne Light, I was 41 years old. There were a number of CEOs in the town who were names I'd heard of, I read about, in business papers, and people I just respected immensely. And all of them spent meaningful time here in the region on social issues. Even the businesses that were more international. So I would sit there, and say, okay, if you're a utility, right? These are my customers. This region I have a vested interest in. But I was always amazed at, I'll call it the leaders in this community who really try to make a difference. And I remember, I'll say, talking to one of them, and I asked him the question, and he said, we all actually are in this leadership for, a short time relative to our lives. And it's an opportunity for us to open doors, to do things that if we do it in a positive way, can really make a difference here. That, because you're CEO of PNC Bank or CEO of UPMC, some really high stature position, you can use that for the greater good. And I'm just amazed at how much time and effort those people spend. And I kept thinking, a guy running a tiny little utility like Duquesne Light, and I ought to be spending every hour of every day that I can doing it if this is, sort of the model. And the one thing I've 100% learned in this community, and I learned it again this year, is that when people are in need, there's something about the people in Western Pennsylvania who step up. And we started the United Way campaign this year with an idea that pandemic had created more needs than we'd ever seen before in this region. And at the same time, with economic challenges, shutdowns, furloughs, all the things that were happening, our resources would probably be incredibly challenged. And what we were counting on is that people would rise to the occasion, seeing the need. And I, without question, people who've given before gave more. And we've seen that over and over, that example of people in this region, when there's a real need, they step up. And so I think, and I have probably set the record in this city for asking people for money. I think I've been involved with almost every charity in town, every organization, and everyone is like, go ask people for money. And I literally, there were times I would make a phone call and ask for three different organizations with one phone call, just trying to be efficient with the person. And the part that is, absolutely amazing is that when people know it's important to you, it makes a difference. The email that you send or the letter you send out to people. I literally would see a difference when you make a phone call, you talk to them about it, why it makes sense. And, and I think it's puts you in an uncomfortable position, because now you put, like being a leader, you put yourself out there. But I'll call it the effectiveness of that is incredible. No matter who you are and no matter, what your connections are, everything's relative. And so I think we all have, call it the opportunity to be effective fundraisers that make a difference for organizations. We have to be willing to put ourselves out there. And I think the more you invest in it as to putting yourself out there, the more effective, the more effective you'll be. And I think the great thing about this community is, we recognize that when there are important needs, people stand up, and it's not just the wealthy. It's the average person who's willing to truly make I'll call it even sometimes more meaningful sacrifices when something's important here. And I see it all the time. And I think for you as a young professional, it reminds you of the good that's in people, and it reminds you of sort of the spirit that's here. And as you take that into your business and you think about, whether you're creating a mission or a vision around something and tying it to a social good, that carries a lot of weight with people, and it makes them feel good about themselves. It makes them feel good about, that they're doing something that makes a difference. So I think it's a powerful thing. And I think the earlier in your career you recognize that, one, you have that power, you have to be willing to put yourself out there, that you can be an effective person who can help make change and grow, call it resources for organizations that are having those impacts, that the opportunities are here. And and I'll just end with saying, why not the United Way, right? Like, if you're looking for an organization, I throw those guys out as a good example of people that you'd be proud, and knowing that, like, money you raise would actually have an impact on families here. So
that is actually the perfect lead into my question, which we got a handful of folks asked the same question, which was, what has been your experience with the United Way, and how did you initially get involved with them?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I initially got involved with United Way. It was, there was a day when it was the corporate thing to do. Like, as you reached a level in a corporation and at Duquesne Light, you contributed to the United Way, you listened to the presentations. But me personally, I became engaged when, as I became CEO there, and I really got to see, I'll call it the thoughtfulness and the effectiveness that the United Way has, and that there's so many organizations. As I said to you, I've been involved with lots of them in this region, and they do lots of important things for very specific causes. But the one thing about the United Way over the years, it's basically taken are the most important issues of the day and the time for our region, and given people a way to make change in those areas. If you look at homelessness, or you look at families who are struggling, in economic challenges, or senior citizens, whatever, I'll call it the important issues that this region has, and you think about it and it tugs at your heart, and you don't know necessarily, you have a day job, how are you ever going to make an impact on that? And I think, one of the things I've seen is that, the United Way is the venue and the way to focus on having an impact on things that you feel really good about. I go back to my leadership conversation. Every one of the employees who talk about their careers, they say the best day at work was when they were helping somebody. Well, that feeling they had that created that best day. Also, when you're helping people in your volunteer efforts, right? That's the definition of a great day, right? So when you really are helping people, and I think, like I said, I've been involved with them for so long, and have watched all the people, like all these folks on this call, putting all their resources and their, tools to work to help this organization create something that truly has an impact on important things in this region. It's incredibly powerful. It's like, creating that organization that everybody buys into the vision. To me, that's what United Way does for our community on the social aspects of the challenges we have here.
That's great. So I think this is the sort of perfect closing question for you is, you've got all these accomplishments in business and in civic engagement. What are you most proud of?
Yeah, it's so I don't even hesitate when I say what I'm most proud of. I am clearly proud of, the people that I got to work with, as CEO of the company at Peoples and Duquesne Light. And I see, once they've, and I always tell folks, like, once you're open and you see what it is to have, I'll call it this culture that says, I want every employee to be the best version of themselves, and I will support them in that development in every way that I can, and empower them to do the things that will make them better employees. And you see that, and you can actually walk away, which I've done, and to still see, I'll say that energy and the pride and the enthusiasm and really the value of what they believe their jobs are. I see it all the time, and it just, to have been a part of that and to help create what I consider to be two great companies here with people that are doing great things. That's an incredibly, for a guy who grew up here with no intention of ever being a leader in this community, to have that legacy and to see that, and those folks having the impacts in this community on important issues, just makes you feel like really proud of that time and that opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, Morgan, I can't thank you enough for spending the time. I know that was, an hour really well spent and inspiring to everyone, especially as members of the Bridges Society and individuals who are involved with United Way. So it just reaffirms everything that we already believe in. So we're going to throw it over to Kate Dawson, who's going to do the wrap up for us. Thank you again.
Thank you, Laura. We are so glad that you were able to join us all today. And thank you, Morgan, for such an inspiring lunchtime. My name is Kate Dawson, and I am a Bridges member to impact the lives of people around me, to implement changes in and benefit our community. It's an incredible group that allows the opportunity to network with young professionals in both our area and other communities. It affords the opportunity to participate in professional development and volunteerism events year-round. So thank you again to our current members for renewing your membership this year, whether through your individual annual gift or by making your gift through your workplace campaign payroll deduction. If you find value in events like today's and enjoy connecting with others in the young professional age range who care about philanthropy, volunteerism, networking, I encourage you to bring in friends and colleagues and coworkers to our Bridges Society. We are hoping to host these Good Point speaker events about 3 to 4 times a year, with additional exclusive events to come. If you have any questions, feel free to talk to one of us members or get in touch with Linda in Allegheny, Kelly in Westmoreland, and Sherry in Butler. We look forward to seeing you next time, and thank you again for attending and for supporting the important work of the United Way. We wish you safe and happy times, and have a great rest of the day.